Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 371, and today's guest is Melissa Withers, managing partner and co-founder of RevUp Capital. As an entrepreneur, are you thinking about your capital stack? Meaning, how are you going about funding your company? There are lots of different options. You could bootstrap, you could raise money from friends and family, grants, and of course raise venture capital, which is the most discussed option in the media and within blog posts. But one vehicle that I don't think is talked about enough is revenue-based financing, which is a non-dilutive form of financing where repayments are tied to a percentage of a company's revenue. In this interview with Melissa, we get into lots of details about why this is such a compelling option for entrepreneurs, as RevUp is focused on this category as a non-equity investment fund for B2B and B2C companies ascending the $1 to $10 million growth curve. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics like Melissa's background and the story of her journey to becoming an investor, all the details about RevUp and how their model works, the importance of storytelling when pitching your startup to investors, KPIs and figuring out your company's God metric, the importance of mental health and balance for entrepreneurs, and so much more. Okay, quick side note, is your company hiring? If the answer is yes, then what are you doing to build up your company's employment brand? If you don't have a content strategy, then it is highly likely that you're just flying under the radar. The good news is that we can help. A subscription to VentureFizz includes a content playbook for sharing all the details on your company, your people, and culture. We leverage all formats of storytelling to include video, podcasting, employee profiles, and more. Reach out to info@venturefizz.com to get all the details. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Melissa. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Likewise, I think this is long overdue.
I know. I've known you we're going to date ourselves, man. But yeah, we go way back. I'm in a space with a lot of young people, and you and I were having a conversation similar to this when they were in like high school. So yeah, we've been around. We've been around for a little while, yeah.
So true. So I think this is a long overdue conversation. So I'm glad we're finally having it. We're going to talk a lot of different stuff about your professional journey and obviously what you're doing with RevUp. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about a topic that I think is something that entrepreneurs don't always think about, and that is having a diverse capital stack and what that means. Venture capital seems to be the golden ticket, but it's not always the way that companies need to be formed. There's lots of different ways. So I thought that would be a perfect starting point.
Well, you're coming in hot. This topic, it matters to me more than almost anything. So I think I'm on like my 140th company. I've worked with a lot of founders, and there is a lot of mythology about how you capitalize a company. And that mythology is really problematic. Even the best venture funded companies don't only use venture funding, right? So it's like this idea that your capital stack is this progressive, successive round of equity financing really misses out on the opportunity to get educated and learn and train yourself how to match the right capital with the right job, right? And it's something particularly for first-time founders you just wouldn't be thinking about. So for all companies, you have to not think about really how will I fundraise for my business. You need to think about what kind of capital stack do I want to build for my business, and how will that stack evolve with me over time so that I'm getting the most bang for my buck, so that I'm putting the right money in the right places, so that the cost of capital that I'm balancing across my business makes sense. And it's very difficult even today in kind of startup land to find conversations that extend beyond how to raise from angels, how to raise from early institutionals, how to raise from coastal VCs. A lot of our conversation is isolated around thinking only about that kind of capital. And for about 30 years now, most early stage companies, as they progress, very few, you will look at their capital stack and find only venture or equity at play. So it's very, very important. You got to find a capital mentor, you've got to educate yourself. And you have to start to think beyond fundraising in terms of how you're going to be a good capital navigator.
Yeah, and that's why I was excited to talk to you about this topic, because I think what RevUp does is very different than what most people are aware of. So before we get into that, let's rewind the clock and talk about your background story. So where did you grow up? What were you like as a child and getting your career started?
What was I like? I was a latchkey kid. A lot of people my age, Gen X. Both my parents worked. Grew up in a small rural place, didn't have internet, didn't have cable, didn't have television, didn't have video games. I'm just on the cusp of that. Those things all came into my life, kind of post-adolescence. I was kind of a nerd, loved to read, loved storytelling, spent a lot of time by myself, which I think contributed to what most people would say. I have a very active imagination, I think, from spending a lot of time alone. But then, really early on, just always had had an entrepreneurial bent. Got my first job when I was 7, worked in a fish and chip shop that my neighbors owned, and then really started working very early. Just loved to work, kind of a border collie. And that just, I think, in terms of like, tell me about your childhood, it's probably the thing about me that anyone that knows me well, like, would recognize. I have a hard time sitting still. I've been working, happily working, from a very young age. It's a little crazy to think about a 7-year-old, peeling potatoes at a fish and chip restaurant these days, but that's how it was in the 80s. We did things like that.
My dad was an entrepreneur and he had a leather coat factory. So,
We're exposed to so many dangerous things.
probably. And I was the youngest of 3. So we each had our tour of duty of cleaning the factory. So that was the Sunday project of cleaning leather scraps and bathrooms, and just taught me work
my
ethic.
very first job was cleaning coffee cups off the counter at my other neighbors. They owned a New York system hot wiener joint. And if I cleaned off all the coffee cups, I could keep the quarters. And then, then of course, like, I progressed. Like that was my first job. And I was really little, barely could reach the counter,
would flip a quarter into the leather scraps, and I would find, I'd be like, Dad, found this quarter. And I was like, this was the greatest thing ever. And he was just laughing. But at the time, so that's so funny.
I wasn't forced to work. I know people who had, childhoods where they were working for survival. I share it as more indicative of my disposition, my origin story.
Yeah, no, I love that. Great story. That's why I love talking about this early beginning stuff, because it just like shows the the grit and
we are who we are, right? We are who we are. Mm-hmm.
So you decided to study English Lit at Rhode Island College. So what was behind that, and how'd you get your career started?
Yeah, I didn't really just decide. So I was the first person in my family to graduate college, and as in my community, I actually went to that school because it was very cheap. It was the only thing I could afford. I didn't even understand how to get into college, but I knew that I didn't want to. I knew I needed to go somewhere, and my family, the only kind of jobs that women had is like to become a school teacher or a nurse. So I actually ended up there. I didn't choose it, but it ended up being a great experience. I was a big fish in a small pond. Got up and out of the little town that I grew up in. Met some really amazing people that just sort of opened my horizons. I think it's the one thing that college is hard, even today, when we know that college can be problematic and expensive and difficult. It is one of the only ways for a young person in the United States to expand their horizons in an environment that still has a safety net. And so this is the thing about thinking you're going to become a teacher. They save the teaching till the end. So after many years of studying for becoming a teacher, I went inside a classroom and discovered that I hated teaching. Literally, like in my second to last semester, I was like, I have friends who are teachers. I was terrible at it and I hated it. So I had to make some quick thinking. So I studied biology and literature, and that ended up being that's what I ended up graduating with a degree in. But mostly for much of my undergraduate, I was thinking I was going to become a teacher. And then I went to graduate school where I really found my path.
Yeah. So how'd you get your career started from there?
I went to Northeastern, go Huskies, which to this day has a strong focus on getting people working while learning. And I love science, studied science. The only metaphor I can use is I'm a very good cook, but I can't bake. So like cooking, you can taste and amend. With baking, it's very precise. I didn't understand that actual science was very precise. You're just sort of literally pipetting all day. And there was a level of precision that didn't align with my love of the language of science and the topics of science. So I very luckily found my way into a program for scientific communication at Northeastern. And from there, worked my way in my love of science into one of my first real jobs, where I spent 6 amazing years at Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research, working at the intersection of some really, at the time, extremely cutting edge basic research and the commercialization of those technologies. In particular, just good timing, right? Isn't timing everything? I just told a group of founders today that timing has more effect on whether you'll be successful than almost anything else you do. I just happened to be there at the time that the human genome sequence was really heating up. And I had the opportunity to work very closely with the Lander Lab, which was running the public side of the human genome sequencing project, and got to be there on the front lines as the two public and private sides, so Eric Lander and Craig Ventnor, were racing to sequence the human genome. And for my graduate thesis, I actually wrote about the experience of crafting the public dialogue around some of those technologies. It was the time I was working with Bob Weinberg on cancer research, Rudy Yanish on cloning, stem cells, amazing stuff. And so it was a perfect place for me to take my love of science and see that the ability to tell technical and scientific narratives was in and of itself worthy, even if I wasn't good at the bench. And so that's sort of how I worked my way into that. It was an amazing place.
Yeah. Wow. I never knew that about you. Talk about timing.
Yeah. And well, it's funny, fast forward, and there's only one thing in the world I won't invest into, and it's biotech. I know too much. I know too much about what it takes, right? Yeah, I love science. Yeah. I a total armchair scientist. Love science, popular science, mostly popular science.
Very cool. So what'd you do next?
After that, I just, for lots of personal reasons that were just too boring to share, I made a change, and I actually took a position in economic development, so the theme here was storytelling, right? So entrepreneurship is at its core storytelling. Like in the beginning, right? It's just a story. And then it's all about the evolution of that story, and then the adornment of that story with, sort of stuff and things and facts, right? But it's always a story, right? Until it's a very big company, it's a story, right? And so I ended up getting recruited to work in an economic development role to try to help redesign the story of economic development for the state of Rhode Island, which was very interesting to me, right? And as a person who loves systems biology and loves storytelling, there was a natural parlay of that into the public sphere. I didn't last very long in the public sphere. I worked for a few years, and then that's how I ended up spinning out a company with my partner at the time, who was the director of economic development. And that's how I had my first entrepreneurial experience. Was he and I created a company together, and we did that for a couple of years. And then all of that just sort of rolled through some additional public sector sabbaticals, and then ultimately arriving to more contemporaneous times that I found myself more firmly rooted in investing the way that you would think of me today.
I want to say Business Innovation Factory was where we met at first, because we were supporting, it was great events.
Came down to we used to have these events. Yeah. That was.
They were like TED Talks before TED Talks existed.
It was Richard Saul Werman was our host, and that's his whole history, right? Yeah, it was really fun. We would have great people. I met so many amazing people. That's how I got involved with Tony Hsieh, and one of the great pleasures in my life was being able to spend some time working. Not really working, that's unfair. Many people did real work, but I ended up having a lot of visibility into his Las Vegas project, and spending some time in the Las Vegas project and really seeing Tony in action and being able to spend time being around him. And his was just such a profound influence on the way I think about things, and was tremendously sad when he passed away a few years ago. Yeah,
very tragic. And if people aren't familiar with the name, founder of Zappos, so just an amazing entrepreneur.
And again, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, this story doesn't get told much, but Tony wanted to create a new framework for entrepreneurship, and he wanted to create a community in a city where it was just for entrepreneurs to thrive. And it wasn't perfect, and there were always problems with it, but at its core, it was a really, really brilliant, innovative way to expand the dialogue around ecosystem. Because we talk a lot, we throw the word around a lot. And Tony developed an idea called collision points, and that the way to build successful entrepreneurial ecosystems was to create opportunities for collisions. And so he designed a whole city flow, like a couple blocks, so that people would have opportunities for spontaneous and meaningful collisions. And while again, it wasn't perfect, the project, kind of wound down in ways that was suboptimal. A lot of the work that happened there, I think, drove a lot of rethinking about how we support entrepreneurs and what kinds of programs and what does it really take? Like, it takes a village, right? But what should that village look like? It's really interesting work. And I hope someday it gets documented beyond what's documented today. Book idea, Withers, book idea.
All right. So, Beta Spring, I know I was deeply involved with Beta Spring as far as supporting one of the first accelerators. Like, this is early days of accelerators. Yeah, there were like
6 of them.
Yeah. Like Y Combinator, Techstars, Beta Spring.
Alpha Lab in Pittsburgh.
And then there was what was the one in Philly? Dream It Ventures, right?
Yep.
That was
Yep.
an
Dream
early
it.
one too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Just a few. Yeah. It was really early on. Yeah. I
Mhm.
didn't build that accelerator. My other people did. I came in
Right.
a little later and did more kind of work on the post investment side. But it's
Got it.
how I
Okay.
really, sort of got started on thinking about investing and early stage investing. It was a really formative part of my career for sure.
All right. So that program, from what I gathered in my deep Google research or ChatGPT or Perplexity, whatever I was using, so those 89 companies that raised 65 million in follow-on rounds, which is really amazing. So how did that lead you to where you are today at RevUp Capital?
Yeah. So one of the most important thing that I took away from that experience was after seeing, 89 companies pass through that model, and then all the things I saw as just being involved in that world, I really became disenchanted, disenfranchised with the lack of tools, right? This idea that the only way to monetize an early stage investment was through an exit. It didn't align with everything I knew about all the other companies I had worked on, like everything I knew. I was like, why in this important chunk of our economy do we only have this one way to invest? Why can't, there's got to be another way. And I didn't like what it led to, right? This idea that you could only invest into companies that had this sort of unicorn potential. And these models to this day are designed to pick 100, 80 die, right? 20 persist and 5 pay back the fund. I mean, I think it's a brilliant model for high risk speculative swing for the fence stuff, but it just became broadly applied to every startup. Every company created now was being applied to that model. And it was really missing out on a group of companies that are sort of either VC adjacent, too early for that kind of funding, or culturally had just been locked out because of the cultural and systemic biases inside that system where dollars are not really directed, across race and gender or geography, right? So, and because I didn't come from finance or come from venture, I had no problem imagining that something else could exist. And so, rather, I knew I didn't want to do another venture style fund, but I also, working with founders had kind of ruined me for all other jobs, right? Like, what an amazing life I live. I get to, on any day, talk to maybe 10 different companies, either as an investor, either through my fund, through my work as an angel investor, or just to advise. And I pay, I volunteer a lot of hours. What a great job, right? But I knew
It
that
really
I
is.
knew that, yeah, I
It
was like, it's
is.
great. It's like, great. It's like good work if you can get it. So, my partner, Alan Tier, I didn't do this alone. We just started having a conversation with each other about like, why are we stuck inside this model? There's got to be another way. And so we raised a tiny amount of money, about $600,000 from a friend. And we were like, let's just try this new way. Like, can we create a model where we still get to look and feel like a boutique equity fund where we're making, good choices, low throughput, high touch, lots of value beyond our cash. But can we find a way to monetize these investments for our investors without exits, with or without exits? And that's how I mean, again, we're not the only ones that thought of this model in the sense that there's revenue-based funding in other industries, but they look more bank-like. And at the same time, NBBC was beginning to experiment with it. So we can't take credit for inventing it, but we were really among the first in the world to take these models that were used in more mature industries and find ways to adapt them so that they'd be appropriate for earlier stage companies. So that was back in 2016. And it worked, just worked. Like fast
Well,
forward now,
you say you didn't invent the model, but it's not widely known. I don't think I ever heard of it until you were launching RevUp, and I was like,
it's
yeah,
widely known. It's sort of widely known outside of the venture bubble. And I don't mean that as like an insult. It's actually we are not even even the founders I talked to today are far more aware of the asset class. So it is, yeah, it is a really large asset class. The struggle is that it can look and sound like it can really vary. So I fit here. I kind of live in between kind of the poles of equity and debt, right? I live in the middle because we don't use a debt model, but it's a contractual obligation. So in some ways, you should think about it as debt because you're going to owe money to my fund, with or without exits. And I think that's pretty unique. There are only a few of us. And I know that other people that do it. I'm a venture advisor to another fund that my friend, a great fund called Capacity Capital based out of the Southeast. There are a bunch of us who do that, but it's just, like you did your event last week, and you had 4 venture capitalists, all who actually said the quiet part out loud for the first time ever, which is basically like many of you in this room should not, will not, and cannot be eligible for venture capital. Like they said the quiet part out loud, but for everyone, a lot of times there's just nobody else sitting up there who could even say like but you might look like this. So there are a lot of options. The asset class has grown. Oh, especially if you had asked me in 2016, I would have said it was pretty difficult to find groups that look like ours. But today, it's one of the fastest growing asset classes in all of the funding realm. So kind of like yes and no.
Well, yeah, I mean, 2016, it was like, what? And now it's like,
definitely. Definitely 2016. Yeah. Now
the
it's
education's
like
been there.
Yeah. Like now it's also normalized. Like all of the stakeholders recognize that this is a very viable and important part of the capital stack for companies, and really thinking. And I think some of the realities of venture and the money lost in venture and all of that has made obvious that, the value of a diversified capital stack, the right places to use non-dilutive capital when it works, right? Like now, again, it's not a fix-all. Like there are a lot of things you shouldn't use my kind of money for, right? Like there's a lot of things that equity is really good at, and that's what you should use if you can get it, right? So it's really more about, like thinking about going back to your first question. It's more about building a diversified capital stack so you have the resources you need, when you need them and at the right cost, than it is that one is bad and one is good.
Let's play out a scenario. So this is non-equity funding. So I'm like, okay, I'm a B2B SaaS company in some vertical, and I've got product market fit. Like there's something there. I've got sales. What level of sales do I need to be at where it's of interest to you? And then like, what happens? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to sound so like boring when I explain it to you. I speak only for myself. There are other people who have models that don't follow these criteria, right? And there are good versions of this, and there are some really predatory bad versions of this. So buyer be warned. For us, we don't care so much about baseline revenue. There are other factors that matter to us more, but structurally, we designed RevUp to invest into companies that are going up what we call the kind of like $1 to $10 million curve. Could be 1 to 20, right? Like with inflation, but it's essentially a journey that anyone that's built a company will resonate with. When you get to that kind of first, I don't know, could be $500,000, $1 million. There's just this place where you get this first place where like it kind of works. You've got some people, it's working, but and I know that to get to that 10 million milestone, not only will what you're doing not get you there, some of it will actually hold you back, like founder-led everything, being super capital constrained, having everything be personality driven instead of process. So zooming out, we built RevUp not with the model at the core, but with the mission at the core to help more companies go up that $1 to $10 million curve. It's very, very challenging to do that, but it's incredibly exciting when you can, and you can get more companies up that curve by just giving them the right guardrails so that they don't make the same mistakes that you only know what you know, right? So we really built RevUp independent of what model we used to monetize it, to focus especially on companies that were at that stage. And that continues to be true today. On the vehicle side, our primary way of investing is through what's called a revenue contract. And that's just like it sounds. It is a contract. It's not debt. It's not a loan. There's no personal guarantees. It's not securitized, but it's a contract, right? And it has standing in the world. So you can't just walk away from it without consequence. But essentially what it does is it codifies in a term sheet. I tell you, okay, I'm going to invest $350,000. You're going to give me back a multiple of that, somewhere between 2.25 at the low end, maybe 3x at the high end. And you're going to do that by sharing a small percentage of revenue over a relatively long period of time. So somewhere between 4 to 6% of your revenue. So less than a channel partnership, right? Like it should be at a place inside of a company with healthy unit economics where it's not an encumbrance to the business. And then you're gonna continue to make that return every quarter until you hit that cap. When you hit that cap, it's over.
And you keep your equity.
Yeah. I mean, we have in the new fund, we have the option to make some equity investments into our portfolio, but it's not our primary focus or our primary way of creating investor returns.
And so one of the challenges that a lot of, I would think, companies are at this stage, it's like, okay, I was able to grow revenue to that, 300, 400, 500,000. and I'm struggling to get to the million to 10 million. Like that's really hard. And maybe I have a small team and I don't really have a dedicated sales force yet. So there's all these things that, founders are going through. How do you help them figure that piece out, like scaling sales, go to market, and those avenues?
We built the fund in 2016 around these core skills because we were good at them, right? So like any good fund, it's like, what are the managers good at, right? That's my partner and I are very good at that. Then we built a network of people to support that. And we have a platform director, Michaela Camp, who's an incredibly important part of our team. And then we have an advisory board made up of lots of people that I know, that we see all the same friends, a lot of them based here in Boston, but we're national. So we have advisory boards that are members that are all over. And then we have a lot of our LPs are active individuals who really care about the investments they make, right? And so we leverage our LPs. And now that we have, 60 companies in the portfolio, our founders and our alum, right? So we do it both through direct action that we take through the fund, right? We resource the fund both through our direct action and through the action of agents that we use and employees and otherwise to provide that value. And then we also leverage that extended network, to fill capacity gaps in a way that allows us to be free of the scale limitations of just the 3 or 4 of us, right? Directly taking action.
Very cool. I mean, it's one of these scenarios for a lot of companies. It makes sense. There are companies that absolutely should be venture funded. Like they are a big swing.
Yeah, we wouldn't have medicine or robots or hard tech without it. Like it's very, I'm an angel investor, both like local here through TBD, and I'm a member of a national group called Angels. And like there are incredibly like good and important times for equity, very early and high risk and speculative. Like they're very good, great opportunities, but there are also, there's a lot of value untapped by using these alternative methods to invest into companies in between those two things.
Interesting, because it's just, I think there's a lot of companies that have a lot of potential for revenue, but it's not going to be that hundreds of millions or billions of dollar exits that the VCs are looking for, but it's a very healthy business. And maybe it's something that would be an acquisition.
Well, and they have good exits. They're just not like a venture scale, like a good venture. I have a company. Yeah, I mean, I have a company in my portfolio now that has that they're at $7 million of revenue, and they have an offer, a term sheet for a $40 million purchase. Like
these are phenomenal.
These are like incredible outcomes, but they don't. That said, most venture funds don't predict venture outcomes. Like it's really like the top decile of funds. It's a power curve, right? Like everybody else is producing not results, right? Like it's just a very, the exit only model is really hard, and you got to be positioned in the right way. But it is high risk equity still has an important role. It's just where we get into trouble is in this hyper capitalization mode where, companies get hyper capitalized. And then when a more modest exit materializes, the investors are not happy with that because it doesn't amortize all the losses that they've had for the goose eggs. But worse is what the thing that keeps me up at night is the outcomes that founders have. They just don't understand what it means to have preferred stockholders. And they don't understand what it means that even if you are lucky enough to get bought for 20 million, no one tells them that it's never, they think it's all cash. There are times when a founder, and then as soon as you tell them, they're like, well, duh, of course. And I'm like, yeah, like it's not usually all cash, right? And then you have rules in your docs about who gets the cash. And again, I'm not anti-venture. It's been incredibly good for certain people, and some amazing things have come out of it. And thank the goddess for high risk speculative capital to get medicine and drugs and all these other really important, amazing things. But for founders, the more money, there's a credible correlation between the more money you raise and the amount of money you'll never make on your company, right? It's very challenging to take on, like to hyper capitalize and then work your way out of it. So there's just a lot of complexity there. And I think we don't have a great narrative to talk to founders about that in our startup ecosystems. It's challenging.
I mean, even today, I was like, so I get the daily email from the Hustle, from HubSpot Hustle, and the headline was zombie unicorns, and the whole premise was all these companies that raised during zero interest at a $1 billion valuation. They had the numbers from whatever source, Carta or Crunchbase or something, and it was just like there's so many companies that were valued at $1 billion that are losing money still, can't raise, and some of them will survive and produce that outcome for the VCs, but a lot of them, it's going to be a tough road ahead.
Yeah, it's just, the way that I always normalize that is to not be positioned as anti anything. It's just, we need to expand the capital toolkit that we have to fund entrepreneurship. Like, not put aside the moral imperative to do so, right? Put aside the moral imperative to empower more founders to benefit from the economic upsides of entrepreneurship. Just even put that aside, because we could have a whole conversation about the moral imperative to make entrepreneurship accessible to more people than it is today. Just from a pure profit center, the ability to have companies in the world that make and sell things that people want and need, and the ability to take capital and put it to work against those companies. There's an incredible economic opportunity there that gets overlooked in this sort of VC only dialogue, right? So I really do think there's a moral imperative, there's a social imperative, there's an economic imperative, right? And that's like, I live, like, it's kind of the story of my life. Like, I'm the least likely capitalist, right? Like, it's funny. I'm purely, can you get any more capitalist than, being a private investor in the private market? No. But, I do care a lot about those other things. And so, I've spent some time thinking about how to design a model that allows me to achieve some of those moral imperatives, but in a construct where it's economically productive. That was very important to me. I'm like a capitalist wrapped in a socialist pizza, wrapped in a capitalist burrito.
Well, but according to your website, 65% of your investments are diverse, with led by women or people of color.
Diverse C-suites perform well. There's a lot of evidence that shows that diverse C-suites build strong, resilient organizations, right? So functionally, like, again, put aside the moral or social imperative, which I do care about, and I'm not going to hide this from you or the world. I really do actively look for diverse C-suites when making investments. That said, I like dudes. We got just dudes. Like, the dudes are okay. Like, don't worry. Like, and some of my favorite companies are just dudes, and they're just dudes, and some of them are just white dudes. But I think, but yes, a large amount of my allocation of our fund goes to, I think more broadly, I think about founders who build business without the perks of privilege. And so this, like, again, includes, it's not so much about race or gender. It's really about finding entrepreneurs that are strong operators and who are building their businesses kind of outside those networks of privilege that kind of skid the tracks just a little bit. So it can be as simple as having personal wealth, where it makes it easier for you to not get paid, having that kind of safety net landing pad, all the way through being, either born into or working your way into credentialed networks that make it easier for you to build businesses, like all the things that exist that create just a little bit of privilege for some and disprivilege for those that don't. Like, those are my people. It's like where I come from. I'm kind of chimeric. I can sort of fit in anywhere, be whatever you want me to be. But my first job was at a fish and chip joint, in downtown West Warwick, Rhode Island. Like, I didn't go to Stanford, right? And there's a part of me that, well, you can't take that out of me. It doesn't mean I don't like those people. I did spend 6 years at MIT. I love all the world, but in entrepreneurship, like, strong operators, you can have privileged, strong operators, but many people who don't have the perks of privilege become strong operators by matter of necessity. So selfishly, as a person who needs strong operators, like, there's just a lot of organic alignment there that even if I didn't intentionally care about directing resources to founders who need it, operationally, there's just a lot of synergy between operators who've had to get to where they got without a lot of extras. And then you can kind of like help them let go of that, get them out of bootstrapping themselves to death, right? And kind of unlock that. And so for me, that's just where I like to be, what I like to do. And I know my partner shares an appreciation for that as well.
Well, another side of your model that I think is interesting is from the LP point of view. Yes, you're not going to get the equity big swing of that company that does exit at some crazy multiple that could be, amazing. But there is more consistency of a return.
Yeah, I start sending money back a year after a fund closes. I start sending money back, right? Yeah, and so any good investment strategy is going to be diversified, right? And all of my LPs, I'm not the only thing they invest into, right? And probably there might be a few people where I was like their first time they wrote a larger check, right? But in general, there are a few things like that drive our LPs, I think, to be interested in what we do. One is we use a dividend model. So rather than wait for exits, companies are returning value to the fund almost immediately. And then we're returning those dollars to the investors very quickly. So our funds begin to produce investor profit, between 12 and 18 months after we close the fund. And then we send those back and the checks get bigger over time. And it's, we're returning a very competitive IRR, anywhere between 17 and like 24%, and a decent, like 1.75, like 2.5x cash on cash return, like better than a lot of venture funds, right? Now, again, all this could go horribly wrong and the next fund could suck. Like, welcome with high risk investing, like welcome to my world. We only take money from accredited investors, but I have a strong LP base in Boston, and a lot of the LPs are also attracted to my model because they believe in that story I just told. Like, they resonate with this idea that there should be a broader toolkit to support entrepreneurs, and that we should be finding ways to reward entrepreneurs who have strong operating acumen. And many of them have also lived on the sour end of the stick of what happens when you hypercapitalize and you end up with very little in your pocket at the end of the day, right? They've seen that, they've experienced that, or they ended up on the good end of that stick, but recognize that it's such a rare occurrence that they want to be part of something else. And so there's definitely, the model is good. We've had excellent historical results. We've made more money than many venture funds make. But a lot of the LPs that I work with are just really, really good people who believe in entrepreneurship and want to see entrepreneurs get funded out, in ways other than just through the traditional venture system.
Yeah.
Shout out to my LPs. I would name you all.
LPs rule.
If you like a Simpsons episode, can you play like some kooky music and we can just run all their names? Like, they're just the most amazing people in Boston. Everyone knows them. There's probably 30 or 40 of them that they've been very supportive, incredibly supportive to me, and in Rhode Island too, and all over the world. That's amazing LPs. We wouldn't be here today without them. Just always goes without saying that this was new. I was new at this. I was not credentialed. There's no reason to anybody. Now people take me at face value that I deserve to be an investor. I kind of snuck in. And I think there's a lot to be said about taking risks on people. And I certainly think about that in my own investing and certainly in my angel investing. There's something to be said about balancing your sense of, I really want money back with, I'm going to take a risk on a person. And particularly early on, before we had, my 2016, 17, 18 funds are all closed complete. So when I say what I returned, it's real, right? It took a while to get that much proof. So now I have investors who maybe don't care as much about the mission. They just like the money part. But I would never gotten here today without the tremendous support of so many people in our ecosystem. So it's true. What's true for founders is kind of true for the investors, right? And in many ways, I see myself as the founder of this fund, because I had to do a lot of the same things to build this fund that I had to do to build a company.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of work.
I didn't just raise money, right? I had to design a model. Right. I had to match it to the right market. I had in some ways, I very much feel like this was like a founder experience based on other founder experiences that I've had. I digress.
Well, it's hard to
Would you like your show back?
I know it's hard to pick portfolio companies. It's kind of like picking your favorite children, but what are, maybe one or two examples of companies that...
Yeah, I do. One of the best things about being so I've received opportunities to run a really larger fund, to get more transactional, to look like a bank. And I have no interest in it, because one of the best things about running a relatively small fund, the model is terrible for me. So small funds, there's no money in small funds. The business is terrible. The business model of small funds is pretty bad. And I won't be buying a yacht, even as successful as I have been in RevUp. But one of the things I like...
You're referring to the management fees, right?
All that stuff. The business model of small funds of big funds is wonderful. Small funds, it's really, really dismal. People don't... When you meet a lot of these new fund managers and they want to have lunch, and first thing I always tell them is prepared to not make any money at all. Just be prepared for that. You got to do it. You got to do it because you love it. But one of the best things is that, we pick every single company. I don't have an investment committee. I pick them. And then, we decide who's going to be the lead partner, but we work with all of them. And I will not invest into a company if either my partner or I are not googly eyed about them. Because if you don't love each other at the beginning, I'm not going to love you 3 years later after we've lived through some cycles. Right. So, I really, really like my founders a lot. Unilaterally, we're having an event. I think I don't know if you're coming on March 5th, where we're bringing a lot of our founders and LPs together. And I am so excited. I already have my dress pressed. I can't wait because I actually really love these humans. But I think the thing I like the model the most, and now this is to get to a more granular answer, is there's a lot of flexibility in my model that is hard to have in an equity model. So if you're making your money only on exits, you got to get really good usually at a niche, because not only do you have to understand the space, the tech, you also have to understand all the downstream funders. You have to understand the acquirers. Like, you've really got to saturate yourself in a zone. And I'm a generalist. I think that's another feature of Gen X latchkey kids, is we were sort of the last generation of generalists, where it was fine to be a generalist. Like, you didn't need to be a specialist to be considered intelligent, right? And so like you mentioned, a recent investment, a company based out of New Jersey called New Doors, which uses precision manufacturing and some pretty nifty software to essentially be able to do cabinet refacing at a massive scale, right? I mean, like that's so fun. Like, it's stuff that I can visit their factory. I get to go to a factory. It's so cool, right? But on the other hand, I have enterprise software companies that, I just love working with, that look, very traditional B2B enterprise software, healthcare, fintech. I have a Boston-based company in our portfolio called Unicorn, that just came up with a very simple solution to put period products in every stall. I don't think you've ever had a period, but if you did, I can tell you, when you need a feminine care product, you don't need it on the counter or in a vending machine. You need it where the toilet paper is, right? So it's the company called Unicorn just has come up with a really cost-effective, ingenious way to allow large buildings and enterprise customers to put feminine care products in every stall, right? And then, but I'm also an investor in a Boston software company here called Zaki Point Health, which, is a health tech SaaS platform. So over the last 60 investments, the diversity of it is just exciting for me. And as a generalist, it's also kept me sharp. Like, it's hard. Like, if we're playing like startup trivia, again, I can't go deep, but I can beat almost anybody at startup trivia, because I'm like a mile wide and an inch deep, right? About a lot of things.
Well, one of the things that has come up maybe once or twice in this conversation is the importance of storytelling, which I've just been noticing that has been coming up. It came up at the event we hosted of your deck and the pitch, and how, some of the founders that raised recently, how they had to tweak it. So how do you advise founders on that piece of storytelling?
On storytelling? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to building the story. I guess a few things. I just had this conversation this morning with some really early stage founders. The first is, like, I didn't invent this, but you really need to understand the why now, why this, why you, right? Founders really miss out on, they get the why this, they love to talk about their product, but they miss out on the why now and the why you. So the why now is, there's good research that still to this day shows that, like, I'm repeating myself, the timing, right? Timing is everything. And so what you need to do is you need to be able to first, but not first, I don't necessarily mean literally first, but in the early part of your why now, why this, why you, and why should I give a fuck, right? That's how you get an investor to care, is why now? Like, what, because startups don't make waves, they ride waves, right? So what wave are you riding? Like, what is happening in the market at a large scale? Because you can't make anything happen at a large scale in the market. What's happening in the market that you're like, what's the wave you're riding that you're gonna ride, right? And then the why this, like, what's surfboard? Like, why is your are you using a longboard, right? Like, again, I can't believe I'm using a surfing metaphor. I don't even surf. And then, so why this? Why is your intervention the right intervention to match the moment? And then what ties it all together is why you? Like, why are you the right team, right, to do this now? And I think many companies, when they tell their story, they don't get that quite right. And I think the other part is many founders, when they write their decks, really don't understand what, like, they need to describe as their terminus in order to track to a particular kind of investor. There's a big difference between tracking to an angel investor or tracking to an institutional investor, tracking to a regional VC versus tracking to a coastal VC. And so I think a lot of times first-time founders don't really understand how to tell a story beyond the customer, right? They like, how does the business become more valuable, right? And that's not always about revenue, hashtag, says the revenue-based investor. Like, sometimes the way the company becomes more valuable is more than revenue, right? It's something else. And I think founders really struggle with that. And that's a place where, people can help them improve.
Yeah, and it comes to recruiting too, or it's telling the story that this is
yeah.
going to be.
So amen, brother. Like your story. I've given this talk to Techstars founders many times, and other like accelerator groups. Like, your story isn't about fundraising. Like, your story is like the absolute skin of your company. Like without it, you're just a bag of bones, man. Like, and you're so right. It's not about it. People think about the fundraising story, but the story is how you get other people to help you. It's how you get, customers. It's how you get anybody to just look at you and say, yeah, let's do that. Like your employees, your partners, your customers, your champions, whatever. It's all in telling a story that really resonates with the listener and moves them to take a specific action. And I think sometimes even being too obsessed with your fundraising story, kind of limits the way you think about your story. And I think maybe truncates some of the value that you might be getting when you tell that story in other environments. Yeah, we're kind of myopically obsessed with fundraising stories, but your story is pretty important, man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going through some of your blog posts and you had a post about, figuring out your KPIs and figuring out your God metric. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have lots of opinions. Like, so I say my partner says I have strong opinions, loosely held. So, I mean, I think there are 5 or 6 ideas that are always spinning in my head when I talk to companies, but you gotta, and there's people who disagree with having a God metric. Like I think that like one ring divide us all. And I do, again, I don't believe in orthodoxy. What might make sense for one company might not make sense for the other. I do think for early stage companies, there is a challenge to even just picking what KPIs matter. And if you pick the wrong ones and you're missing something, right, that's a problem. It's like a sleeper problem. And so I think it's not so much that you should like be married to singular metrics. It's that you should have a constant internal process for gut checking the metrics you are tracking. And are you tracking them for reals? Are you using them for reals? And are you challenging yourself to revisit your hypotheses or assumptions about why those KPIs are the best ones for your business? So and I think in the end, it's not so much that every company should have a God metric. Every company should always be thirsting and questing to find the right set of metrics. And it's generally can't be like thousands of them. At the very, very top, a small set. Maybe it's not 1, maybe it's 2, it's not 10, but constantly be questing and really challenging the company to rethink that, because it truly does change over time based on what you're trying to achieve. For example, there are a lot of mid-market acquisition opportunities for software companies that they miss because they're so obsessed with market ownership KPIs that they're missing opportunities to improve KPIs that are going to be attractive to a downstream acquirer. Or in the same faith, the same spirit of this, you'll have companies so obsessed with investor beloved KPIs that they're missing KPIs that are valuable to an acquirer or to the market, right? And you just get drunk on your own matrix, and you can, really miss out on opportunities to track better, track differently. And over the course of a life cycle of a company, sometimes absolutely go upside down and you can really get to a place where you're like, that metric is no longer useful. So it's like a discipline. It's like one more thing that you have to be good at if you want to be a successful founder.
Well, another piece that you've discussed recently too is, the balance of an entrepreneur between, building something and having some level of balance, mental health. But like one of the things that I think founders might struggle with is, when is it the right, like, when do you shut down a company? Like, how do you
I have
know?
a lot. We need to talk a lot more about the mental health experience and we'll get to the shutdown experience of like being on the journey. And there's an incredible amount of toxic machismo in entrepreneurship that I think will and continues to cause deep, serious harm to people's lives. We're approaching the 3rd anniversary. A very beloved member of the startup ecosystem here in Boston died by suicide. It will be 3 years coming up this spring. And many of us were galvanized around that event because we were talking so little about the humans inside these systems. And there's so much like patting on the back for grinding it out, being worn out, being tired, being hustling, like so much glamorization. And it's a lot of this post that I think it's like, don't die on this hill. There are many hills in entrepreneurship worth dying on, but like this ain't one. I was at an event here at this co-working space that I work at, and we were going around the room, and it was like a mentor night, and they asked the mentors, like, what was the best advice anyone ever gave you? And went around the room, and, a predictably kind of like wealthier, older guy, probably in his late 50s, early 60s, definitely had some money in the bank. When it came his turn, he looked at all these founders and he said, never quit. There was a time, I couldn't unhear it because I knew this story. And yes, you don't go into entrepreneurship if you don't want to grind it out. You can't quit every time it gets hard. There are 100% times when you should quit. And it's really easy to say things like, don't quit when you have familial wealth, when you have money in the bank, when the costs of failure are not so high. Like for many people, for different reasons, failure, like this fail fast thing, doesn't work for them. It's not the outcomes that they have, right? And so I think there's a ton of just toxic, and maybe McKee's mode, I don't want to be melodramatic, but there's a lot of toxic language about the struggle and glamorizing the struggle, mostly told by people who aren't struggling, right? Or if they did, it was a long time ago. And the struggle is different today than it was 20 years ago, right? Particularly for people that maybe don't have any economic privilege, right? So I just did a podcast episode I'm going to talk about this every time someone brings it up. Case in point right now, but I am just deeply disturbed and saddened by how little we talk about it. And I talk about it a lot, and I talk about it a lot with I had a company that made the decision to wind down in my portfolio. We haven't even announced it to our investors yet. And this founder tried really hard, really long. And I agree with her. It's time. You can recover from a failed business. You cannot, a ruined life is not something you recover from. Period. I'm sorry. And we forget that most investors playing this game can afford to lose a few bucks. Let's be real. So yeah, a failed business. Okay. A failed life, a ruined life. I'm not down for that.
But how do you know it's time? Because you put so much blood, sweat, and tears in this thing. It's like, well, what if we pivot, or what if, the market changes and the regret?
Yeah, the answer to that question, I'm very careful. I think I listen more than I talk about. When someone comes to me in a situation like that, the most important thing, if you're listening out there, mentors, you got to listen first. Be really careful. Listen first. And then the second thing is be very conscientious to not put your framework on top of it, because you got to really understand the lived experience of the person behind it, right? What's happening in their life, what options do they have, what safety, security, what supports do they have, makes a big difference to how glibly you answer that question, right? And really the founder has to answer the question. But there have been times when I've been, the only best honest feedback was I don't believe you are going to turn this around. And so you are at a pivot point now where you're either going to go off the cliff, Thelma and Louise style, or you're going to intentionally slow down the car, shut up the engine, get out, right? And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but there's a time when and I think it's important for people who have the power to say so, while also recognizing that you've got to find a way to deliver that counsel, in the contours and context of so that the entrepreneur understands that it truly is their decision, and that they really will bear the worst of those outcomes, whatever those outcomes might be. And so sometimes it's just reminding them that most people investing into early stage companies are not they're not going to not feed their kid because your company failed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotional, especially for underrepresented founders too, the emotional, they feel like they're carrying the burden of their whole class of people, right? There's a lot of pressure there to not fail. So there's a lot of complexity there. But I'm not an expert. I just try my best I try to do no harm.
Well, great advice. I mean, each situation is its own unique situation. So you got to listen.
It is.
And that's great advice.
Listen.
So
yeah. But the answer is never what that guy said. It's never unilaterally don't quit. I can tell you it's never that. It's never that.
All right. 3 apps you can't live without. It can't be Slack, email, or calendar.
Can't be Slack, email, or calendar. I spend most of my life using Slack or emailing, and my calendar.
That's why I crush those.
Yeah.
Box them
that's
out.
Well, I mean, I listen to music a lot. So, and I'm lazy. I use Spotify. I think if you took my Spotify away, I'd be super duper sad, because I wouldn't have, I listen to a lot of podcasts. So if you took my podcast app away, I don't think I could live. I'm not sure I could survive that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at, unfortunately Uber, which that just makes me want to smash my head against the wall. But I travel a lot. Our portfolio is very widely distributed. I travel almost every week, and like it or not, I take a lot of Ubers. So if you took my Uber app, actually my phone, I was in Midtown New York, Manhattan, a couple months ago. My phone spontaneously died. I spent the night in Boston. I woke up, my phone didn't charge. I got on the Amtrak train and realized I couldn't show them my ticket because it was in my app. I realized that I would have no navigation when I got to New York. I realized that I would have no like way to get a car I could get in a taxi. I mean, I'm not an idiot. It's really where being old helps because like I grew up without this technology. But it was one of those moments where I basically like was able to use my laptop, wrote down the address of my hotel. I know New York really well. I knew how to get from Moynihan to my hotel. And then I literally went to the Verizon store and I spent 3 hours and, paid like $900 or whatever, $1,000 to get a new phone, because it's not so much a singular app. It's the fact that my entire life, we're so digitally dependent that the biggest thing I can't live without is my being able to charge my phone. As it turns out, electricity, at the end of the day, is the one app that we can't live without.
Well, my hack that maybe I'm not using it properly, but so when I take a taxi in Boston from Logan, I used to use Uber, and maybe I don't call the car early enough, or there's traffic or something, and I'd be sitting there waiting for the Uber, and I'd be like, look at the taxi stand and be like, they're wide open. so my hack now is I just go straight to the taxi stand. They're wide open.
Good.
They're so grateful that you're using them. So I'm like back to the
what
old
other app I love is so I love high-low jack. Some people call it pitch. I love to play high-low jack, like competitively play high-low jack.
Oh, cool.
When I need a minute, I will play high-low jack through this app with a bunch of other freaks who are addicted to high-low jack. So that that is one I can't live without.
Some real stuff.
Yeah, like high-low jack is my happy place where I go to be different. Like that's where I get to do some things. I box too, so a lot of the things that I use for my training are very important to me.
Awesome. All right, any like good you listen to podcasts or good book recommendations for entrepreneurs?
I mean, just consume. There's so many cool things. I mean, we live at a time of peak. I consume too much content. One of the reasons I took up, boxing and ended up, really getting competitive and starting to have, real fights in Atlantic City was to stop consuming content.
Wait a second. Whoa. Stop. You got that deep into boxing where you're actually fighting in Atlantic City?
I've had 2 matches at the Showboat Casino and Lounge. I legit. It's not like it's my favorite. That's my favorite talking point is how much I love the cult of boxing. And I had my first fight 2 years ago. I won. And and when you think about Atlantic City and now think about the Showboat Casino Hotel, whatever you're thinking, just take it down. Just take it down a notch. It was brilliant. It was great. I had my second fight there and I lost that one spectacularly. I got my ass I got pummeled. Actually, ref called it in the second round. This beautiful goddess just beat the fuck out of literally face bloody. It was a nightmare.
Is this 3 rounds? 3 rounds, 2 minutes?
3 rounds, yeah. 3 rounds. Yeah, so
minutes.
it's USA Masters Boxing, which is Masters is code for old people. So it's like anybody that's over 35. And
you have headgear on, I hope, right?
We have headgear. Yeah, 16-ounce gloves. In my first, I won. It was an amazing experience. One of the things I love about boxing is I love getting out of the bubble and the people I meet through boxing. I mean, women's sports in general is just an amazing place to diversify your point of view. But women's boxing, I train out of a gym in Warwick called On the Ropes with world champion Jamie the Hurricane Clampett. And some of the folks that I've met through boxing, one of my coaches is the deputy warden at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, right? It's just a way that you're going to meet people that don't do what you and I do all day. And it's just so important. I just think it keeps me just on my so much more human. It just because otherwise our little world is lovely and precious, and I could just go to reception and then but then I go home and I'm oh wait, there's a real world out here that I have to live in. But yeah, boxing. Also, I studied neurobiology, neuroeconomics, and I love the science behind boxing as a brain building tool. So boxing is used to treat Parkinson's and other neurological neurodegenerative diseases, because there's a real magical thing that happens when you move your hands and your body and your feet at the same time. And then when you do that in such a high pressure environment as a boxing ring, you're actually activating a lot of cellular pathways that help grow neurons. And as I've aged, I ran 6 marathons. I did all the good ones: Chicago, Boston, Philly. I loved marathoning, but nothing got like, I'm in better, like boxing is particularly for a woman of a certain age, the effect of boxing on my body and my brain is just amazing. And the last point is, I think a lot and I talk a lot. There's no thinking or talking in the boxing.
Just reaction,
and it's
impulse.
You think about, sometimes we'll spar 3 or 4 rounds. It's just 10 minutes of my life where I have thought about nothing except that moment. And that like little space reminds me that it is possible to shut my brain off from time to time, and very important. I highly recommend everybody out there, if you're not, boxing isn't part of your fitness regime, make it so.
Yeah, incredible shape. I mean, like wrestlers, boxers, they are insane shape. I love it. So, and you brought up, women's sports, and so I have 2 daughters, so I'm, passionate about women's sports in general, but the quality. Okay, so in boxing, I was one of the fools that watched the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight.
That was
the
a spectacle.
Fight before that, with the 2 female boxers.
Katie,
legit.
Amanda Serrano.
It was legit. I was like, this is what boxing is. Like, they went
gash on her eye.
at it.
Yeah.
Yes. And
women's
the WNBA,
boxing it's really fun to watch. Women are more technical in the boxing ring, because we don't have the upper body torque. Like, we don't like I'm not going to knock you out with a single punch. Like, my body's just not built that way. I might try to do it, but I won't. So women's boxing is just far more technical, far more about like volume over like single punches. It's a little bit like watching like college basketball and how exciting college basketball is. Then you watch like pro basketball and it's all these specialists being specialists. Then you watch college ball and it's like, wow, like people like really like, you see a different, I think it's similar. Women's boxing, you see a lot of really interesting technique and sport. And it's really, everybody felt that way about the Taylor Serrano fight versus, the type, that whole, I don't even know what that was, but in general, Katie Taylor was the first woman to fight and to headline at Madison Square Garden just I think 2 years ago, and it was magical. Like, whole crowd was there to see 2 women headline a fight. It was the first time in boxing history where that was true, and it was an incredible fight. Those 2 women are monsters. I wouldn't
amazing. It was amazing. I was like, wow. And then you just feel the passion
them.
like you felt bad that someone had to lose that fight because they both gave it their all. And you brought up basketball. I feel the same way with men's NBA versus WNBA. It's such a better product to watch. The NBA, they're just standing around the 3-point line, not even sweating.
Yeah, they're all specialists, right? Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, things will change, and you'll see specialists emerge in those sports. But yeah, boxing is I never thought. I mean, I hate violence. I still have never watched all of Fight Club. I'm a giant baby. Like, I don't even like the sound effects of violence. Like, I block my ears when there's a fight scene in a movie. Like, I'm really, really conflict averse. Really do not watch people hurt each other. And there's a huge, I don't watch MMA at all. The huge irony that I found myself participating in a combat sport after I turned 40. Like, it just goes to show you, you are who you are till you're not, right? I tell that to a lot of founders. Like, you are who you are, you know what you know, until you're not and you don't. And then you just change. Things change.
Well, if I get into boxing, Melissa, I will refer to this podcast as you're my inspiration. So
look me up. I'll spar with you.
I actually thought about it, so it won't surprise
it's really,
me
really fun. It's super fun, and you don't ever have to get in the ring with anybody. You can do all kinds of things to get all the benefits without
training.
Yeah, you can.
Cool.
So, but yeah.
Well, Melissa, this is exactly why I do this podcast, because I learned so much about people that I never knew.
Thank you.
So that was a great ending. Thank you so much for walking us through your background story. Obviously, all the great work that you and the team at RevUp are up to, and obviously all the great advice.
Thank you. Then thank you for all that you do over the last 20 years for the founders in our orbit as well. We make a great team.
Thumbs up to that.